The world of black metal is a bleak one, mired in misanthropy, steeped in Satanism and suicide, and sometimes even murder. Most people are at least vaguely aware of the story of Euronymous and his death at the hands of Varg Vikernes of Burzum, and perhaps even the story of Pelle Dead Olin from Mayhem and his blackly comedic exit from the world. But few know the full story about a man called Nattramn. A man who, it's said, escaped from a psychiatric hospital and smashed in a child's head with an axe before begging the police to kill him. Little is known of Nattramn prior to his joining of the band Silencer around 1998, and no record of him appears to exist online. There has been speculation as to his real identity, but nothing appears to have been confirmed, and so we're left only with a label. Nattramn. It appears to have no meaning, but is said to, at least in part, represent anxiety and a timid personality. But again, no confirmation, only speculation. Images began to surface around the time of the recording of Silencer's only album, Death Pierce Me, an unusual blend of black metal, doom-like repetition, and Nattram's pained, tortured screeches. Literally inhuman, even demonic in their intensity. In the pictures that circulated, Nattramn was shown clothed in blood-soaked rags and standing in various occult poses. In each, he was masked or his face obscured, covered in what appeared to be his own blood from self-inflicted wounds. He was said to have cut himself deeply during the recording of the vocals to get a truly horrific-sounding scream. The blood dripping down his arms and body as he shrieked out this primal howl over pummeling double kicks and pounding guitars. The most disturbing images to arise were those where Nattramn showed off some new additions to what used to be his hands. Pig's feet. He had his hands chopped off and replaced with the feet of a pig, proudly displaying his bloody, bandaged appendages in photographs shot in grainy, high-contrast black and white, and showing a man in the grip of a seemingly psychotic episode. Lyrically, Nattramn exposed his inner darkness, exhorting his listeners to leap from life, begging them to crush my hope and rape my life, while painting images of fields of unburnt ashes and the monument of strangled masses. Combined with his shrill, genuinely painful-sounding vocals, the lyrics became abrasive, stripping the listener of hope and leaving raw flesh exposed to the stinging acidic bile he spewed into the microphone. What the photos and lyrics don't document, however, is what happened after the album was done. The story goes that Nattramn, clearly a man in crisis and on the verge of self-destruction, was forcibly placed into psychiatric care. He escaped from the hospital sometime in late 2001 and is said to have chased a 5-year-old girl with an axe, eventually catching her and smashing her head open, fortunately not killing her outright, before attempting suicide by cop, attacking the police officers and begging them to kill him there and then. The police eventually managed to distract him with their dogs for long enough to get him on the ground, where he continued his pitiful pleas for death. He would be placed again in a high-security psychiatric ward. Some say he was locked away for 5 years or more, but it's difficult to pin down the specifics. It appears that he was detained as a danger to himself and others, but was presumably treated in the hopes of lessening his suffering and returning him to society. As part of his therapy, he was encouraged by his counselors to take up music again, which resulted in a project called Diagnose Lebensgefahr, roughly translated as Diagnosis, Risk of Death. referring to Nattram's fragile mind state. Far removed from the brutality of Silencer, the album, Transformalin, took a more dark ambient approach, more bleak, filled with despair and a hollow, empty feeling that reflected the mind of its creator. As an artistic expression, it conveyed the pain and isolation of his mental illness and shone a light into a darkened corner of his psyche as he exorcised his demons. Nattramn would later release a collection of art and poetry known as Grisharda, or Pig's Heart, again echoing his use of the porcine imagery of the photographs. The book and an accompanying publishing site and label, Humani Anomaly Liberati, also known as HAL, which refers to itself as a religious theory and practice, as well as the heart of non-human arts, would appear around 2011 and remains active to this day, propagating the work and philosophy of Nattramn via his various projects. It would seem that Nattramn, somewhat rehabilitated and slightly less debilitated, is still creating art and active within the world of music, even seeming to be suggesting a return to Silencer again in 2017. But it remains to be seen what will come of that. All we can say with any certainty in this story is that Nattramn has become a living legend in the world, not only of black metal, but underground music in general. He represents the extremities of the genre as he lives it, fully committed to what has become known as depressive suicidal black metal, all of which Nattramn personifies in one broken, tortured human being.
Truth, as the saying goes, is often stranger than fiction, but it's often even more peculiar than we can possibly imagine. This is true of Nattramn and the wild tales of murderous rampage, psychotic breaks and pig's feet, all occurring in a world renowned for its depressive atmosphere and bleak worldview. Even in that nihilistic world, Nattramn represented a genuine anomaly. Not a poser or a hipster, slap 'em on corpse paint and singing about burning churches, but a seemingly evil, dark human being with no regard for life. Some have identified Nattramn as Mikael Nielsen, but no confirmation can be found. Given the general year of birth given for him on the usual sites, he's a 40 to 42-year-old Swedish guy, but aside from that, there's very little evidence or confirmation that it's true. A cursory search into Nielsen reveals a Swedish artist who looks like he may be around the same age, but this is total speculation, to be honest. If we look more deeply at the photos and the story of Nattramn in general, many inconsistencies begin to emerge that give us reason to doubt the narrative. Let's take a look at them one at a time and try to find the facts so as to better understand Nattramn and his projects. Let's start with the elephant in the room, or pig in this case. The pictures of Nattramn show him with pig's feet attached where his hands should be, covered in bandages and blood. It's a gruesome sight to the weak of stomach, but a closer inspection reveals a few problems. To begin with, he clearly still has his fucking hands. You can see them through the bandages, and besides, the pig's feet extend out in a way that they just wouldn't if it was real. If he actually did manage to do it, then someone else would have had to have sewn them on for him, because he ain't going to be able to sew on his own fucking trotters, is he? So no, sorry, but the pig feet thing's total bullshit. Cool idea, shit execution. On this one, I stand to be corrected from the outset, but let's consider the claims about the self-harm during recording to create those seemingly authentic screams of pain. Anything I've ever read about the recording session suggests that he was cutting his hands and arms while screaming, slashing his flesh with a knife or a razor or something as he screeched, "Cut me, hurt me, take my life, kill me." Now, the screams, even as someone who genuinely enjoys black metal and harsh noise, are disturbing sounding as well as irritating. They sound like a man who's genuinely not quite right, but they also sound incredibly overdramatic. What's most peculiar to me about this whole thing is this. If we look at the pictures of Nattram's arms and hands at any time, and even in the most recent images from 2011, we see no signs of scarring or healing wounds. Only in one picture can I see what could possibly be construed as a slight scar on his left arm. But even then, it could just as easily be a photographic artifact. As someone whose partner is a recovered self-harmer, scarring on the arms and hands is still clear even well over a decade later, and she didn't even cut herself especially deep regularly. For the quantities of blood involved in the pictures and the fact they did it on a track like Death Pierce Me, which is over 10 minutes long, there would surely be significant open wounds. Also, if someone with this supposed level of mental illness is cutting themselves during a recording, it suggests that this wasn't a one-off behaviour. Again, from people close to me, I know that one-off cutting like that is rare and typically gets worse over time, rather than jumping straight into gouging your flesh. It just doesn't add up. The story about the axe attack is actually far more tragic than it would first appear, but does relate to a series of true events involving not Nattramn, but his older brother, Patrick. Patrick was schizophrenic and had been placed in St. Siegfried's Hospital, but had escaped on the 7th of May 2001. He had stuffed his bed with clothes so that it looked like he was still there, and then escaped through the window, his absence unnoticed until 9:30 the next morning. He travelled by train to a nearby town and stayed in hiding until around 11 AM the following day, when he attacked 2 6-year-old girls with an axe he'd picked up on his travels. He struck both girls. One took a near-fatal blow to the head, while the other was hit on the leg, but both survived, and Patrick attempted suicide by cop. He tried to attack the police officers with his axe, literally begging them to kill him before being smacked on the back of the head with a baton and detained. He was returned to the hospital and locked up again, but consumed by guilt over his crimes, he took his own life in the showers and was found dead by staff. Some have speculated that if Nattramn really did end up in a mental institution, it may well have been due to the grief of losing his older brother in this way and being unable to cope with it. It remains speculation, as no evidence has been found to confirm that Mikael Nielsen was ever sectioned or treated for mental health issues, but the tragedy of losing his brother must have been profound. In discovering the truth behind this aspect of the story of Nattramn, we can safely put to rest any rumours of the artist's homicidal tendencies. Finally, Nattramn himself. As I've said, he's generally identified as Mikael Nielsen, although it's sometimes mistaken for another black metal vocalist who goes by a similar name. An artist who met him during the recording of Death Pierce Me claims he was an affable, good-natured guy with a good sense of humour, but also refused to confirm or deny the stories about mental hospitals and self-harming, further clouding the water. Other genuine outsiders in the black metal world, like Dead from Mayhem, were all said to be very dark individuals, prone to black humour, but not what you'd call affable or good-natured, so, as with the self-harming, it just doesn't add up. All in all, I personally suspect that Nattramn is an art project, perhaps inspired by the struggles of his late brother. Maybe not. I mean, who's to say that it's not 100% legitimate and he was actually cutting himself to ribbons while screeching his lungs out? It's just that, for me, the evidence doesn't support the theory. The fact that a large part of the mythology of Nattramn actually involves a member of his family suggests a constructed narrative based around that idea, perhaps exploring mental health or something. The timescales involved and the breakup of Silencer after the events involving Patrick all coincide to suggest that Mikael turned his back on music after the recording of Death Pierce Me, not that he was the person who committed the crime. As for his intent in the beginning, I have really no idea and can only speculate, so I will leave that to your good selves to form your own conclusions. Thanks for watching from both myself at the WeirdNet and KingSpook, and we hope you've enjoyed this new series we are putting together. Keep your eyes peeled, make sure you're subscribed to us both, hit that notification bell and follow us on all social media for more explorations and narrations involving all things weird, spooky, creepy and wonderful. Take care, folks.